Thank you. And next slide, please. Great. Once again, today's session, I'll take you through it together with Tim Carman from Carbon Africa, and we'll be pleased to take you all the different sections we have, the presentations, the panel, and so much more. So on how to use the platform one more time, please, if you're not speaking, kindly keep yourself muted. Use the chat function for questions, just like we did yesterday. Turn off the camera unless you have been specifically instructed to turn it on. And the presentations will be made available. So just like yesterday, we will share today's presentations again today. And for today's exercise, particularly, we recommend that you use a laptop and not a phone. And certificates will be shared at the end of the session, but on consistent participation all through the 3 days. All right, next slide, please. Great. So we're going to have a very brief recap on yesterday's session, which was on the foundations of carbon markets. Next slide, please. And we had quite a few presentations on this, but I'll just try and keep it brief, but still summarize the important bits on the presentations. So basically, carbon markets as a policy instrument, we learned aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And they do so in a cost-effective manner by setting limits on the emissions and then enabling trading of units between companies or different entities. And this flexible trading enables entities to reduce their emissions at a lower cost to be paid to do so by higher cost emitters, thus lowering the economic cost of reducing emissions. And the way it was explained, this would be in a cap and trade system, further elaborated into an emissions trading scheme. And what would happen is that it's more expensive for some entities to reduce their costs or to put in the best available technology. So they may exceed their emissions, but those companies that have actually found ways to do this will be able to sell their allowances to these other companies to meet their emissions. Of course, the cap overall has to get tighter or stricter or go lower to ensure that there's actually lowered emissions and you're not just offsetting without actually trying to lower your emissions. So all in all, it's a highly favored tool used by private sector entities because it enables them to now factor in that cost of changing their technology or reducing their emissions over time while using the carbon trading. So for us in Africa, we have to remember that we don't necessarily have ETSs, but we have taken part through the offsetting. So what will happen is an ETS would allow CERs, certified emission reductions from projects outside this scope to actually be used for trading within their ETS. So just to remember, when you're thinking carbon markets, think emission trading schemes, think offsetting. And for Africa, we might not have ETSs just yet. And that was also explained because of the demand and supply issue. We could have supply, but not necessarily demand in terms of buyers. But we could get there eventually. So an ETS is something that could happen as we continue to develop and then end up having both buyers and traders in the same system. But for now, we are producing offsets for other systems. And then we went into the fundamentals of the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Convention on Climate Change. And under this, we have also learned about the Kyoto Protocol and how we are moving into the Paris Agreement. So one of the things to remember with the Kyoto Protocol, it divided countries into Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 countries. In simple terms, developing countries and developed countries. And it had legally binding commitment periods between 2008 and 2012, with reducing emissions by 5% below 1990 levels. And then also between 2013 and 2020, with the second commitment period of about 18% below 1990 levels. So these legally binding commitments was an issue, and we've even had some parties withdrawing, as you had Suri mentioning yesterday. The US never took part, and Canada actually withdrew at some point. But now we have the Paris Agreement, which has most countries, it has a global agreement, but it doesn't have legally binding reduction emissions. These voluntary reductions come from countries themselves, and they are outlined in their nationally determined contributions, what we now call NDCs. And the first submission is 2020, which is when the Paris Agreement is supposed to start being operationalized. And it's enhanced every 5 years with progression and ambition. So that's why you'll learn that a lot of African countries currently are updating their NDCs this year and last year. So kindly ask to be muted. Yes. So when we do submit the next NDC, it should be more progressive and have high ambition targets, and countries express this in mitigation and adaptation. So Article 6 of the Paris Agreement now caters for cooperative approaches, a market mechanism, and non-market approaches that can be used as a form of new market generations beyond the CDM and the joint implementation. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, the important thing with the Kyoto Protocol, it had 3 flexible mechanisms: the joint implementation, the CDM, and emissions trading. Kenya particularly took part in the CDM, and a lot of other African countries, because it had to deal with a non-Annex 1 host country. Then lastly, we talked about Kenya's NDC and how it was submitted. The updated NDC was submitted in December of 2020. It abates GHG emissions by 32% relative to, by 2030, relative to a business as usual scenario of 143 megatons of CO2 equivalent. And the sectors are energy, forestry, agriculture, transport, and waste. Financing is a really crucial part to NDCs. And 17,725,000 is needed in USD for our financing needs. And this is about 79% of international financing. And the country also intends to use Article 6. So in a nutshell, we just gave you a basis on the foundations of markets themselves, how they are based internationally, and how the country, Kenya, is planning to use them moving forward. I would like to say just a warm welcome also to the participants who are not necessarily from Kenya, but we really hope that you can take as much from this experience, from the experiences shared over the next 2 days as well. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah. Great. We'll now go into session 2. But before that, I believe we have a quiz. Am I right? Or
indeed, yes.
Yes,
Bianca.
Thanks.
Yeah. So thanks for the recap, and I think we can just now lightly test who was listening, who wasn't listening, and feel if the room picked up those key points. And we'll run this in the poll as the poll function. So please stand by to answer the questions as you did yesterday, but these are based on content, not on personal information. So Bianca, I think, or Julie, sorry, can you run the poll? Do I need to stop sharing, or is it it'll go straight through? Oh, there we go. Yeah, okay.
I hope everyone can see that. So
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so there's 9 questions in all, and I'll just work through each of them. So under a cap and what scheme, governments or intergovernmental bodies like the EU set a cap on emissions, i.e. a legal limit on levels of permissible pollution within a given time frame period. So the answers are either market, commerce, or trade. So cap and what? I guess people can already start answering. Julie, is the quiz live? People can answer.
Yeah, on my side it is. I'm hoping everyone can see the screen. So you can choose one answer out of the 3. So
yeah.
Okay, we still have 0% participation. So
okay, maybe I can call on maybe Brian, if you're listening in. Can you confirm that you can answer the quiz?
Oh. Yes, Tim, I can answer the questions.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Because I guess you can answer it live and then we can see it moving forward. So if people could answer question 1. Okay, cool. We're in business. Slightly worried there for a second. Okay, so that's question 1. Maybe to just run through it again. So under a cap and what scheme? And the answers are market, commerce, and trade. Question 2, but please read through them. Fill the gap. Trading enables entities that can reduce emissions at a something cost to be paid to do so by a something cost emitters, thus lowering the economic cost of reducing emissions. So the options are those that can reduce at either a lower or a higher cost can be paid to do so by those that are emitting at a higher or lower cost. We're still having a very low response rate. I don't know if people are struggling to navigate the system or not, but please plug in the responses to the questions. Okay, 4 people. Great. Don't worry, I mean, there's no kind of penalization at this stage.
It's anonymous, so yeah, we wouldn't really know. Like, so there's, even if you get it wrong, don't worry. It's a learning experience. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, maybe just read through question 3. So which of the following is not an advantage of a market-based instrument? Do they provide an incentive to reduce emissions? Do they promote new technologies? Do they lock emitters into fixed cost and actions? And are they, the permits have flexibility in achieving emission reductions? Okay, good response rate increasing there, which is good. Phase 3 of the European Union's emissions trading scheme runs from 2005, 2007, 2008, 2013, 2013 to 2020, or 2021 to 2030. Question 5, the UNFCCC, this is from Suri's presentation yesterday. Is it a compact, a convention, or a contract? Seems to be consensus around one particular answer there, so maybe a bit easy. Number 6, one of the 3 flexible mechanisms of the Kyoto Protocol is joint implementation, implementation joint, or cleanest development mechanism. Slight tricky answer there. What is Kenya's mitigation commitment against the business as usual by 2030 under the current NDC? 15%, 30%, or 32%? Question 8, what percentage of Kenya's mitigation contribution is subject to financing from international sources? 70%, 19%, or 79%? And then what is the length of the NDC reporting cycle? 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years? So those are the 9 questions. So please run through them. And I guess we'll wait until, yeah, we're over at least 50% responses, but maybe we can just give a time limit. Bianca, I don't know, 6 minutes or so, give another minute.
Yeah, I think we're almost at 60%. So, which, yeah, so it should, just another minute should be fine.
Okay. So anyone still pending their responses, yeah, please work through. And then I'll run through the answers live with you now. Okay, just give it another.
Yeah.
Go on, Bianca. Get going. Yeah. Okay.
That's good.
Cool. So thanks everyone. Please feel free, if you're still working through it or you just joined us, please feel free to keep responding. It's also a chance for you to gauge where your understanding is at. So feel free to go through that. So let me just run through the responses now and see how successful we've been in getting our key messages across. So question number 1.
So 1 minute, Tim. I think it's possible for us to share the results as well.
Okay, yeah, if we close off, yeah. Sure.
Yes.
Okay. Great. So I think we've closed it off, so you can see the results now. So question number 1, under a cap and what scheme, governments or intergovernmental bodies like the EU set a cap on emissions, i.e. a legal limit on levels of permissible pollution within a given time frame? So indeed, the answer here is cap and trade. So the cap is the upper limit to which people can pollute, and the trading component of it is, in order to reach that cap or stay below that cap, there is an opportunity to trade allowances or trade emission reductions, or even buy additional carbon credits from outside the cap jurisdiction, as was presented by Clarice yesterday. So those of you ticking market, yeah, I mean, it's still a market-based mechanism. So it's still centered around utilizing the market to have cost-effective strong environmental performance, but the specific phrase is cap and trade. Okay. So next, question 2, fill in the gap. Yes, I think most of you got this correct. So the fill the gap. Trading enables entities that can reduce emissions at low cost, so is the first answer, to be paid to do so by higher cost emitters, thus lowering the economic cost of reducing emissions. So the basis here is that anybody within inside that cap that has an economically interesting opportunity to reduce emissions. Sorry, can we just mute? Thanks. Basically the market approach will enable the private sector developers or business owners or polluters to search for that low cost opportunity. So those high emitters can then find value from that investment. That's the idea behind the market approaches and trading. So good, that seems to have got the message across well. Question 3, which of the following is not an advantage of the market-based instruments? Indeed, the market-based instruments we've said before are set up to provide incentives, market incentives to reduce emissions. They are there to promote new technology, and they also are there to permit flexibility. So you saw from the flexible mechanisms of the Kyoto Protocol, this allows for some flexibility from the private sector to sort their solutions for the environmental challenges, and it doesn't lock emitters into a fixed cost. There are clearly arguments for and against those approaches, but this particular market-based instrument doesn't lock in people to a fixed price. So well done, very good. There was a bit of a split on this one. So phase 3 of the EU ETS, yeah, there was an initial preparatory phase. This was presented by Clarice yesterday, running from 2005-2007, almost a pilot-esque phase. But then the real kind of first or second phase, sorry, kicked in under, you'll notice that the phases, sorry, that should be 2008-2012, apologies on the second one. The phases match the commitment periods of the Kyoto Protocol, you'll note. So phase 2 was 2008-2012. Then phase 3, so 45% of you answered 2013-2020, which is the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol. And then phase 4 now is running from 2021-2030. And yeah, that's the one that we're currently living through now, of course, which is aligned to the Paris Agreement. The UNFCCC, yeah, I think this is a convention as presented by Suri yesterday, so I don't think that requires too much explanation. 95%, so that's good. Then there was a slight trick question under question 6, one of the 3 flexible mechanisms of the Kyoto Protocol. It is indeed, as 71% of you got correct, joint implementation. Cleanest development mechanism, yeah, it was a bit tricky. Maybe some people haven't had their coffee yet this morning. It's clean development mechanism, not cleanest, but yes, a bit of a small difference. 7, what is Kenya's mitigation commitment against business as usual 2030 under the current NDC? So remember that Kenya submitted its nationally determined contribution in December 2020. The originally submitted NDC had a commitment of 30%. But Kenyans, yeah, should be aware that actually it's now increased to 32%. So following quite an extensive review exercise internally led by the Ministry of Environment and then signed off, effectively by the president at the end. The commitment is now 32% against that business as usual. So well done to 53% of you there. Again, those outside of Kenya, please look at your NDCs, because these are important contexts for carbon markets moving forwards. Number 8, what percentage of Kenya's mitigation contribution is subject to financing from international sources? Yeah, the answer is 79%. So if you read through the NDC, there's an overall financing component, so how much financing is required. And then it is divided into that will be raised by national budget and that will be raised internationally. And furthermore, it is split between adaptation funding and mitigation funding. And the mitigation funding component, so Kenya's commitment to have 32% reduction in emissions by 2030 against business usual, is subject to receiving financing support of 79% from international sources, and some of that could be through carbon markets. So that's why it's an important contextual figure as well. And then the last one, what is the length of the NDC reporting cycle? So yeah, that message clearly got across. 82% of you answered with 5 years, and indeed that is the correct understanding. Okay, so I think we can stop sharing there. So well done to everyone for going through that. I think we've consolidated our understanding from day one, and now we'll go into session 2. So potentially back across to you, Bianca, or I might just jump straight in.
Yeah, I think I just want to reiterate congratulations to those who were listening yesterday and to today's recap. So well done. Then we'll go into session 2 because our first exercise actually, Tim and Julie will help us go through a particular exercise on the carbon market cycle, the carbon project cycle. So I think if we're ready, this is a bit interactive as well. So it's on the carbon asset project development cycle. And maybe the Carbon Africa team can take us through the instructions on how to do this. Oh, sorry, there's a rundown of the agenda. Let me just hand over to Tim. Yeah. Sorry, I just jumped straight into the agenda. My apologies. Yeah, it's all yours, Tim.
No worries. No worries at all. And the I think maybe first of all, what we can do is just we can confirm that everybody received 2 documents yesterday that were shared with the link for the meeting. There's 2 documents. So one is a PDF document on the carbon asset cycle. It's a PDF. And the second is an Excel spreadsheet, which is for calculations. So while I'm running through the agenda, if people could just make sure that they have access to both those documents, and in particular, open up the PDF document of the project cycle, so the carbon asset project cycle. Because today, yeah, slight change of tack. It was quite PowerPoint heavy yesterday. There was quite a lot of information, but based on the results from the quiz or the brain teasers this morning, a lot of that kind of core information got across. And again, just to reiterate that the reason for sharing that information is to just ensure that those foundations are understood, because they do really have an impact on future carbon market engagement. So today we're going to look, take a little bit of a look backwards in some ways, and look at the Clean Development Mechanism, voluntary carbon markets within the Kenyan context, and look at a few different aspects in relation, or the fundamental aspects in relation to carbon project development. So first, this morning we'll look, we'll do an activity just after this on the cycle itself, so how to develop a carbon asset project. And then we'll have a couple of inputs from myself and from an auditor. So we're lucky to be joined by David from TÜV Nord, who will give a presentation on what it means to act as an auditor within that cycle, which we'll hear more about. And then we'll have a brain break again, just to get things flowing again. And then we'll jump into a calculation. So Julie, my colleague, will go through a Excel spreadsheet, as I mentioned before, which has been shared. So please do make sure you have access to that. And we'll go through some steps towards calculating an emission reduction. And then in the afternoon, we'll hear from a series of project developers. So there'll be a presentation from my colleague Julie on the Kenyan carbon market, so how many credits have been issued, under what kind of projects, etc. And then there'll be presentations, or there'll be a panel, sorry, not presentations, from 3 or 4 project developers, and again, Dr. Mambia as a national authority inside the CDM context. So without further ado, we'll now move on to the first kind of interactive exercise. So as before, I don't know whether people are confirming in the chat that they have received the PDF, and Bianca's also shared it in the chat. Great, thank you. So if you could then open that document, and the idea now is for us to split into groups of 3 people. So there'll be a breakout room. You'll be all automatically assigned. There's no facilitator in the rooms. It's just 3 participants in each of the rooms. And you will then look at the PDF, and you'll see that it's a fairly straightforward exercise where, let me just show you what you'll see, where there's 8 boxes around the cycle, and then there is 8 steps written in the box above. So you can see in the box above, there's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and there is 8 boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And this shows a cycle of carbon asset development. So what steps do you take in order? So the idea is to split you into those breakout groups of 3 people per room, and you simply assign the step or the letter, whichever one you feel more comfortable with, to the boxes. And as mentioned yesterday, this is a little bit old school, so just a pen and paper, and then write the answers down. So you could do it simply as box 1 is A, or box 7 is F, etc. And we've even, to make it a little bit more straightforward and for you to understand, we've even done a couple for you. So box 2 is project design development, and is B, project design development, and then 6 is monitoring D. So what we'll do is we'll just give you 7 minutes in those groups to go through that. So talk to each other, go through to try and assign the correct step to the phase, and then we'll come back into the main group, and then I'll go through the answers with you on the screen. So don't be worried about having to present or anything, just freely go through it. So if any other colleagues have anything to add, or we feel the instructions are clear enough, indeed, Deanna's mentioned, yeah, please, of course, take the time to introduce yourself so you can also network a little bit in those groups. But I think from my perspective, that's clear enough. And then I think we'll just set the breakout rooms. Julie, if you could go ahead and do that, please.
Just checking, how many minutes do we give? That's
let's go for 6 minutes. Yeah, 7
okay.
minutes.
6 minutes.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. So you're going to go into groups of 3. That will be 20 groups. So I'm launching it now, and then after the 6 minutes, the group closes automatically. Then you're directed back to this main session. So you're doing that now. Okay.
Okay, when you receive the message to join, just click join. Julie, sorry for those
Yes.
listening in, I think this is internal discussion, but I think everyone's been assigned. It's just Charles. Charles has been unable to join, has it?
Okay, so I think he joined late. So
Yeah.
yeah, there are a couple of people who came in late when
Yeah.
though I can assign them to. Okay. Okay, let me do this. Assign to Adrian 2 and 6. Charles.
Yeah, and Charles, I think you can, if you just click the button join Charles, you can join room 11.
Yes. Because he is assigned but hasn't here.
There's a message
Joined the room.
here on help in room 14. I can try see what's going on there. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Concept.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes. How are you? Is the
Yes, fine.
exercise clear? Does everyone have access to the document?
No, we don't have access to the document.
It was shared in the chat, so I really advise if everybody can be looking in the chat, but I've just put it up for you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
All right, so the exercise is basically to try and fill in the cycle. So there's been a few examples given in, for number 2 and number 6. So number 2 is project design development. So individually you can write down, that's why we were asking everyone to have like a piece of paper. Just fill in what you think would go into number 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8. Yeah. Is that
So guys-
here? Yeah, and you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
discuss. You can discuss. Yes.
So what did you say number 3 was? I'm writing them down.
We said number 3 would be the national approval.
National approval.
National approval, then we can have the audit firm, we can have the validation, then we register with a standard, and then we get the carbon credit issuance. I don't know if I'm right.
You
said,
saying?
you said national approval is number 3, then number 4.
Number 4, then we have the verification by the audit firm.
Validation. Verification.
Then the verification, that's what I'm thinking. Maybe if you have a different idea. Then verification, then validation, then registration, then carbon credit issuance.
I'll just give you
Okay,
a tip. Validation comes before verification. So yeah. That's the only tip I'm allowed to give.
Wow, thank you for that.
So, what are you? Number 1, what have you talked about? Number 1 is the
Number 1 is the concept document.
Idea development.
yes. Number 3,
Project
Number
design. Then
No,
number
project
3.
project design.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Maybe I could just ask you to mute. Everyone mute themselves. There's a few people, I guess, also still communicating. Apologies, I appreciate that is a bit draconian and a bit quick to throw you into the group and then pull you back out again. Yeah, unfortunately, we are a little bit tight on time. So I'm tempted not to jump back into those groups. But what we can do is, yeah, hopefully you got a chance to at least have a little look at it. And then I'll take the next 5 minutes to go through the responses with you, which will then give you the fundamental grounding for what is actually the development cycle. So hopefully that's okay. And again, apologies, that was in hindsight a little bit too short time. So the answers. What I should say is that this is a generic approach. So you'll see after the presentation, after this, sorry, that there'll be a presentation on the broader context of carbon markets, and there are various standards and various approaches. This is a pretty generic approach. So yeah, be aware that these phrases or these steps might differ. But first of all, as with anything, you need a concept and idea to be developed. So F is the first answer, number one. And the thing to reiterate here is that regardless, you need emission reductions only occur in the event that an actual business or a project or an activity is actually implemented. So it's extremely important to understand that in all cases, you need a functioning business, a sustainable business, or an activity that can be maintained in the long run, for which carbon finance or funding from carbon credits will help that process. But in itself, it likely needs other forms of income streams as well. So the function, the sustainability and viability of that underlying business is critical in developing, generating carbon credits. So that's where the idea comes in, and it needs to be underpinned by very strong viability concepts. Secondly, then, after you develop the concept, sorry, at the concept stage, you can still submit an idea to a standard. Many standards, the UN and others, will accept you saying, look, I have this idea and I just want to register the fact that I have this idea, and you can submit what is sometimes called prior consideration. After that step, then, in the event that you designed that viable business or activity, you then move forward and develop the full concept. So you develop, I've written here, project design development. So you're then mapping out the full design, where it's happening, what the scale of it is, what the size of it is, what the technology is, which parties are involved, what you foresee to be the future impact of the project in environmental impact terms, what the projected emission reductions could be. Um, 100,000. Are you going to sell 100,000 stoves in Malawi, or are you going to build a solar PV plant in Garissa? Any of these, this is where you really map out the details of what you plan to do. After you've completed that step, you can then talk to the national authority. National approval is not needed in all cases, but moving forward under the Paris Agreement is a lot more likely that it is needed. In Kenya, we heard from Dr. Mambia, under the UN system, the Clean Development Mechanism, you approach NEMA as the CDM designated national authority and follow their procedures to request what is called a letter of approval. So this is basically an approval from the government saying that they support this project. Again, this is not required in all standards. Sometimes the voluntary standards don't need this, but moving forward, it's highly likely that some kind of national approval within the context of the Paris Agreement will be required. So that's the kind of consolidation of that initial design phase. So you get your concept, you then map out your concept in a lot more detail, and then you go for national approval. And then you have your set of documents ready to then move to hire and contract an accredited auditing company. So many of the standards and the UN and the gold standard and others have accredited auditing companies that then act as a third party. So they give an independent opinion on the quality and the aspirations that you have with regards to the project that you have designed. And that party is then contracted to give an opinion on the quality of that project and whether or not it is in line with the standards and procedures of the standard that you have selected. That costs money, of course, and that independent party then issues it feel that it is also worthy of being registered under the particular standard. And that step 5, the registration, is the critical point. So now you can say my project, my activity, my business is registered with this particular standard, be it the gold standard, Plan Vivo, others, which we'll introduce in a bit more detail after the break. And what does that mean? That means that you now have the future potential to generate carbon credits. So you can implement your project. You've likely been implementing it along the way anyway, but then you can start implementing. So to this date, you haven't generated any carbon credits yet. You've registered a concept, a design, quite a detailed design with a standard that then enables you to publicly state, look, I'm registered with this standard. They think that my design, my idea, my business is of a good quality. And then you implement the project. And as you implement the project or the business, you start selling your SOVs, you start constructing your solar PV power plant, etc. Then you start to monitor what you're doing, because to date, you have only registered your potential to generate carbon credits. You haven't generated any carbon credits. Carbon credits are only generated from implementation of actions of things that have actually happened. So yeah, let's take a cook stove business. You've registered with a project. Now you started selling your cook stoves. You sold 10,000, you sold 100,000, you sold 200,000, etc. You need to very clearly monitor the cook stoves that you're selling, who they've been sold to, where they are, so that they can be located in the future, any maintenance that is undertaken on that equipment, etc. And the monitoring that you undertake is actually based on a plan that you designed in step 2. So when you designed your intervention, your activity, etc., not only did you write what you were going to do, but you also wrote how you were going to monitor it. And the monitoring is usually based on the standards that are prescribed by the various standards themselves. So for example, the UN says you have to do X, Y, Z, you have to monitor the following data, you have to monitor it on a weekly basis or continual or annual, etc. So it's quite an arduous process, it's a very, very serious process. And you need to ensure that when you implement your project, you are adhering to the plan that was in the design of the project or the intervention that you were doing. So as you go through that monitoring exercise, you then select a certain time frame. So let's say 1 year. You've been implementing the project for a year. You have 10,000 stoves in the market, let's say. And you've been monitoring the use of those stoves, you're monitoring where those stoves are, etc. Then you recontract an auditing firm, invariably a different auditing firm from the one that you utilized in step 4 for the registration step. And you contract another company to then give a third-party opinion about the monitoring report that you have developed. So you've been doing a plan for the period that you've been developing the project. This is step 6. And then you say, okay, I've been working for a year. Let me just stop and let me consolidate all of my monitoring information into a report that represents my activities for that year. You put your report together, again, in line with the forms, the documents, the standards that are prescribed. Put the monitoring report together and then contract a third-party verifier, again, an auditing company, to give a third-party opinion on the quality and the content of your monitoring report. And again, with those 2 documents, your monitoring report, which says what you have done, and the third-party opinion that then verifies that you have done what you've said in that report, you then approach the standard again and say, I'm looking to issue carbon credits from this process. And then at that stage, the carbon credit issuance standard will then say, yes, we agree, and we issue those credits. And each of those credits will invariably have an individual serial number, and they're issued into a registry. That the standard then has that obligation to, that it's their mandate to issue the carbon credits. And it's at that point that you then have your carbon credits, your commodity, if you like, for sale. so the key thing, the messages through here are, it's kind of a 2 to 3 phase process. So first of all, you are looking at developing the concept, bringing ideas, more detailed ideas around that concept. So it has to be pretty solid design concept. Then you're approaching the national entity to say, yes, that Kenya itself is comfortable with this design. It's in line with the national interests and the national trajectory. Then you are contracting a third party to issue an opinion on your idea, your concept, your business. And then you are approaching the standard to then register the project. And it is that first step, the registration, that then is a real critical milestone that says, right, I now have the potential to generate carbon credits under this project or this program. From that point on implementation, you then monitor regularly against quite an arduous standard that was that was set out originally. And then at an opportune moment, you say, right, let me stop a year or 2 years, draw a monitoring report, and then contract a firm again to then verify the content of that monitoring report before you approach the standard for issuance. So it's a very robust process. There is financial commitment involved in that exercise, and it's not something to be undertaken lightly. So I would pause then again, just to reiterate, this is a generic process. So in other standards, there will be different steps that you need to follow, and you need to follow very closely the procedures and the standards in relation to those procedures that are set out by those individual standards. Okay, I think I will pause there and just check if there's any questions that come in. Okay, how does one validate what he or she hasn't verified? Not sure I understand the question. How does one validate what he or she hasn't verified? So there's 2 steps. I don't know whether this answers the question, but there's 2 steps. The first one is validation, which then leads to registration. And the second step is verification, which is on the monitoring report. So validation leads to registration, and monitoring leads to verification. I don't know whether that answers the question. If it is nationally approved, then I am confused. Okay. Sorry, Diana. But so that in the CDM, and maybe I'll also present this in a little bit more detail in the following presentation, there is a very clear step that you need to receive a letter of approval from the national authority. And the national authority in Kenya's case is NEMA, and they need to issue a letter of approval. And why that is that the CDM focuses very much on issuing carbon credits based on emission reductions, and leaves the definition or the confirmation that the project contributes to sustainable development to the country. So the host country, and we'll hear from Dr. Mambia later, hopefully, says, yes, this project and this program is aligned with the national trajectory. Now, this is quite different from the voluntary carbon markets, where no specific national approval is required, but it is, of course, prudent to maintain a conversation with the relevant authorities to ensure that your business is operating in line with national legislation. So I don't know whether that helps, Diana. Oh, sorry. Who pays the audit fees? Yeah, so this, again, we'll look at it in a bit more detail after the break. So maybe I'll just pause, hold that question, but thank you for that question. Hind has seconded the question from Elmer, but I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I don't know whether my colleague Julie can help interpreting the question, or maybe Elmer can ask the question if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Well, what I was asking is based
Yeah.
on the diagram we had. And
Yes.
someone has muted me. So I was asking in response to this diagram, and
Yes.
I was looking at, I imagine this is a cycle
Yes.
that one process leads to another. And I was just wondering that why will we have a validation of an audit firm coming before you verify? So I thought verification could come first, but then you've explained that the validation leads to registration, and then thereafter they'll do the monitoring, and then they will verify again, and then issue the credit, carbon credit. So that was my question. I was
Okay.
just wondering why 4 is coming before 7.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, it's quite, and again, different standards have different approaches to this, but the validation step then leads to registration, which then gives you the potential to generate carbon credits, but doesn't actually give you carbon credits yet. Those were used for these many hours, etc., etc. And then the verification confirms that your monitored data was correct. And then that verification can lead to a request to issue the carbon credits. So that's why it's a two-pronged approach. I hope that's clear now. Okay. Then is the validation and verification done by different audit firms? Again, yeah, these are very quite specific rules and regulations around this based on size and scope and sector, geographical coverage, etc. But generally, it is encouraged or standard practice to utilize a different auditing firm at the validation and verification step. But it's not impossible to have the same firm doing the validation and the verification. Yeah. I thought credit issuance and registration with the standard occur at the same time. No, so David, it really is a very distinct steps. They're very distinct processes. You don't automatically receive credits. And the other thing that this diagram simplifies and doesn't show very well is that the monitoring and verification are repetitive. So you can do an exercise of, let's say, what you did in 2019, you monitor, you do a report, you verify, you issue, you do the same for 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, moving forwards, etc. from that basis.
Hi, Tim. Sorry, could I
yes,
just also add like a comment on that? And I think that's actually a really crucial point because that's where a lot of projects get stuck. Once you register and you haven't factored in who's going to monitor, do the reporting and factor in who's going to do the verification, you'll end up not getting any issuance at all. And also, if you don't do the monitoring properly, then you can end up getting a lot less than what you had planned. So it's very important to think it through. And that's the thing, like, I feel a lot of people had misinformation. Once you register, that's it. No, but you have to register and then you have to monitor properly and then get verified and then you get issued. So it's not straightforward like that. Like people thought it was very easy money, but no, it's actually not.
Yeah, no, indeed. And they're quite arduous processes as well, as we'll hear from the project developers as well afterwards. And I think I think in the interest of time, I think some of the questions that are being asked now in the chat
Sorry, Tim, we're losing you, or is it just me?
you can refer to this. Just remember that it is fairly generic. Bianca, in terms of my poor timekeeping here, we're running a little bit behind. Do we want to plow on and just go through the 2 PowerPoints from myself and David, and then see whether or not there's time for the brain break, and take that approach? Or do people need a break?
I think it would be good to go on with the presentations. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay. Okay, so let me jump straight into the core components. I think many of these questions are coming up in the chat as well in relation to these. So I've just picked out 8 core components that underpin the projects themselves. But please be very, very aware as well. I mean, the core messaging here is to successfully issue carbon credits, the fundamental thing that you need to do is to have a business or an activity that works at scale. It is the first thing. Because without the underlying activity, you don't have carbon credits, basically. They don't, without implementation of a viable activity, you do not generate carbon credits. Now, on top of that viable activity or business, etc., you need to align your registration activity with the standard that you're choosing, and you need to align it with the core components that I'm about to present. This is not exhaustive and it's not in a lot of detail. There's a lot more detail behind this, but this is the context. So someone asked a question about the standards themselves. So first of all, I've picked 4, but there's more standards than this, but these are the main ones. And the standards themselves have different geographical coverage. They generate different carbon credits. They're managed by different entities and they have different focuses. So the first one we spoke about yesterday was the Clean Development Mechanism. This is a UN. It is only focused on generating carbon credits in developing countries, non-Annex 1 countries. It generates a carbon credit called a CER, a Certified Emission Reduction, and it is managed by the UN. And it is really focused on emission reductions. That's its main focus. And as I mentioned before, the sustainable development component of the project is covered by the letter of approval from the host government. Next, we have Plan Vivo, which is an international, so you can do it anywhere. They issue something called Plan Vivo certificates, and it is run by a non-profit entity. Their focus is very much on forestry, agriculture, land use, and promoting heavy community engagement. And there's a few projects across the region, as Julie will present later. The gold standard is a very well-known and large voluntary carbon market standard. It is international. It issues something called Verified Emission Reductions. It's an NGO, and it's really focused on sustainable development. So what are, beyond the emission reductions, what are the sustainable development components? What SDGs does the project contribute to? How many jobs are created? What are the quality of those jobs? What is the working environment, etc.? And then VERA is the Verified Carbon Standard, is a particular standard. Again, very well known, large volumes, is international. Its carbon credits are verified carbon units. It is also a non-profit, and it focuses very much on the greenhouse gas emission reductions, less so on the sustainable development side, and is quite big in the forestry sector. And the reason for presenting these is that people who are interested in developing projects need to align their activity, their business with the particular standard that works. I should say that I'm going to rush through this fairly quickly because we do have limited time, but you can see in the top right-hand corner, there's reference to www.offsetguide.org. And really, I actually discovered this in the process of preparing for this presentation. And it is an extremely useful guide. It's a really intuitive, interactive website that they have that is fairly up to date, and it allows you to go through that process. So anyone who's interested in this topic and taking their understanding further can dive into that website after this course and have a look around and see what other information is there. Okay, so once we have the projects, I think this is the easier one. So project types, I've mentioned that certain standards look at certain projects. I mean, here we have large-scale grid-connected power projects, Lake Turkana wind farm, small-scale solar wind farms. We have biomass, so bagasse from the sugarcane industry that can be used to generate grid-connected electricity. So that kind of grid-connected electricity is one. We have cook stoves, be it them energy efficient or ethanol. We have forestry, kind of stewardship or conservation projects, as well as afforestation projects, and we'll hear from projects. And we have waste management as well. What underpins this is that they require a methodology, or they need to be accepted by a standard, and certain standards will focus on certain projects. A lot of the projects that we're looking at. For example, I've taken the list that the gold standard is interested in, community-based energy efficiency, land use, nature-based solutions, renewable energy projects, waste management, and water projects. It's important to note there are other kinds of projects, industrial gases and carbon capture and storage. But I think most of the projects within the African context are focused around those 5 main project types that the gold standard particularly is focused on. But I guess most people are aware of what those project types are. The second element, sorry, it should be third element, is projects and programs. So there's a distinction between projects and programs. So a project is something that happens in one place at one time, in simple terms. And you say, when you design your document, you say, okay, I'm going to do this in this place at this time. So you say, the example, let's say Lake Turkana wind power plant. I'm going to build Lake Turkana wind power plant on the shores of Lake Turkana. I'm going to build it in 2013, 2014. And I project that this is going to generate this number of emission reductions. That is a classic project activity, which is the basis of emission reductions projects. Now, around kind of 7-8 years ago, there was something developed called programs. And the programs are structured in a slightly different way, where you can say, I want to sell cook stoves, not just in Kenya, but I want to sell cook stoves in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. I don't know how many stoves I'm going to sell, but what I want to do is I want to register a program. So a program of activities and an umbrella. I say I'm going to sell these kind of stoves in these countries. And as I sell the stoves, as I move forward, I will then include what are called component project activities under that program, under that umbrella. And why is it useful to have that? It's useful certainly for distributed energy access projects, because you don't know the scale of your business. And it gives you flexibility as you move forward to then at a cheaper rate, much easier than developing a project every single time, to then include those components in the process. So as you move forward, you say, look, I have an intention, I have an idea, an aspiration to operate the program in these areas. And it gives you the flexibility then to include every time, let's say you sell 5,000 stoves, 5,000 stoves, 5,000 stoves, you can then include that component. So you piece it together as you move forward. And for, as I said, distributed energy access projects, like cook stoves, biogas systems, etc. This is a very useful process, and certainly at the national level. So that is a distinction between projects and programs. The fourth component I'd like to bring up is scale. So within the carbon markets, there's a large consideration in relation to the scale of the project. So let's take, again, Lake Turkana wind power plant, 310 megawatts, the largest grid-connected wind power plant, I think, in Africa. That's large scale. So that comes under certain processes, certain costs associated to registering that project, and certain obligations with regards to the accuracy of the monitoring, etc. Secondly, you have smaller scale. So something like the example we have here is a much smaller grid-connected power plant. This is a solar PV power plant. Let's say less than 10 megawatts. This is, the standards appreciate that there is different scale here. So therefore it's cheaper and not aligned to the same degree of arduous monitoring as a large scale project. And then in addition, there is micro projects, so very, very small projects, which then allows smaller developers to get involved in that process. So that is the fourth important consideration. Bianca, did you want to speak? Sorry. No. Okay.
Sorry, no.
No. Okay. So the fifth component, again, I'm racing through these as fundamental components, and they are useful to look at them, is the baseline. So the baseline, you'll all mention it. So what we have to understand is that the activity that we were looking at is going to produce a certain amount of emissions across a period of time if there is no intervention. So this is what we're looking at. This is the baseline. So let me take, for example, a landfill site. So organic waste is dumped into a landfill. In the event that that landfill is not covered, then the methane gas generated from that landfill, the breakdown of the organic matter, will be released into the atmosphere. So that is the baseline. So how much organic waste is put in the landfill over time? How is it decomposed? And then what is the calculation for how much methane will be generated from that organic waste in the event it is not captured? The calculation for that baseline is based on a methodology, and those methodologies are always listed by the standard. They're approved by the standard. So in short, this needs to be an internationally recognized calculation. You can't just sit and make up a calculation and justify it. This needs to be approved by the technical committees within the standards as an accepted way of calculating the emissions. And then now you have your baseline. So if nothing happens, this is the amount of methane that will be generated from this landfill. Now, in the event that you then implement your project, you're saying, right, I'm going to put some piping inside the landfill. I'm going to capture the methane and I'm going to flare it. I'm going to convert the methane into electricity. As you can see from the table, the green component of it is the amount that you have reduced from that baseline. So how much saving is there from or reduction in the emissions? You have stopped the emissions being emitted into the atmosphere, and that in effect converts your emission reductions into the carbon credit. So that's where your carbon credits are from, that saving against the baseline. And that is a fundamental concept. Again, the PowerPoint can be shared so the references can be there. The sixth component, and I appreciate that these are quite complex components, but they are fundamental, is additionality. So what you need to prove is that the project itself is additional. So it would not happen without the funding from carbon credits. There is a few ways to do this to prove the additionality. But the most common one, if you look at the table that I'm showing here, is let's say I have $100,000 to invest in a business. I can take my $100,000 and I can buy Kenya shillings, and I can get interest rate from the treasury bills of the government of Kenya at, I guess they're trading around 11-12%. Okay, so that 11-12% is your return on investment. So that's how much money you would expect to get back. Now, if I go and invest in a business such as, let's say, a cook stove business, I buy a load of cook stoves, I go and distribute those cook stoves. I do a business model and I'm estimating, or I'm projecting, that my rate of return on investment is around 5 or 6%. So we can compare that return. So I get my $100,000 and add my 5 or 6%, my $5,000 or $6,000 on top of my $100,000. Or I can give the $100,000 to the Kenyan government and get my 12%. So what is my incentive? I mean, not me as an individual, but what is my incentive as an investor to invest in the cook stove business as opposed to giving the money to the treasury bills? And this is where the role of additionality comes in. So say, okay, if I invest in this business, I can also generate carbon credits, and I can convert my 6% based on the additional income from carbon credits to 14-15%, which then makes it more attractive than giving the money to the Kenyan government as treasury bills. Now, I've simplified that quite dramatically, but it gives you an indication that I'll give you an indication that the threshold that you need to overcome. So you need to prove that the carbon credit income is fundamental to breaking an investment threshold, and that is where additionality comes in. Appreciating it is quite a tricky topic to cover in a short time, but yeah, okay. The seventh point is that the contribution to sustainable development. So not only does the project have to do emission reductions, but you also have to monitor and you also have to engage in stakeholders. You have to consult the stakeholders that could be impacted by the project. You can see the example here from a biogas project, but how many jobs are created? What is the poverty reduction? How is the economic environment in the country improved in relation to the SDGs? And then I think there was a question here as well about the transaction costs. So there are costs associated to each of these steps. So I appreciate I'm going a little bit over my time here, but each of the steps that I presented earlier have some cost associated to them. So you can pay consultants for step 1, step 2. There might be a processing fee for national approval. You have to pay the auditing company. You have to pay a registration fee with the standard. You have to pay likely a consultant again to support your monitoring exercise, maybe, or you do it internally. You then have to again pay an auditing company to verify. And then you also have to pay an issuance fee as well when you actually get the credits themselves. We'll dive a little bit more into in the exercise after the break as to what those costs are. But let's just throw a figure out there, let's say between $50,000 and $100,000. Just to give you a ballpark figure, it's not necessarily that rate, but just to give you an idea of what we're talking about in terms of scale. So this is not a small decision. It's not to say that smaller projects can't develop them, but that whole cycle is a real investment financially, time-wise, and you need to develop a business case to ensure that the income from the carbon credits are valued against the costs that you're going to make upfront. I think I'll shift the next slide. So just to recap, and again, yeah, I think I'm seriously over time here, but these are fundamental points. There are various standards, so you need to choose the standard that is best aligned to your activity or business. You need to make sure that that standard is aligned to the project that you're developing, if it's efficient cook stove, if it's forestry, etc. You need to ascertain whether it's a large, small, or micro scale activity you're undertaking. You need to ascertain whether or not it's an individual project or whether it's a program that you're developing, something you'd like to develop over time. You need to establish a baseline based on a methodology. You need to ascertain the additionality argument, which is completely fundamental, that there is a strong argument for the carbon credit revenues, or that another barrier is overcome by registering the project. You need to consider the sustainable development components. You need to engage stakeholders through a consultation exercise, and you need to develop a business case whereby you know how much money you need to spend based on the potential income from those credits. So yeah, apologies, Bianca, that is quite over time, but those are the kind of fundamental components for developing a project, which I hope can give people a bit more context of what it means to develop a project.
Thank you very much, Tim. It's a lot. It really is a lot to cover. So thank you for at least touching light on the really key issues. And this really, if you have a good understanding of this core components, then you really have most of it understood. And I think there are quite a few comments that are coming up in the chat section asking, like, how do I maximize on, getting issuance for, a certain project like CRs. So I think you've touched a lot on some of these, like their methodologies specific to each and every type of sector. Just to let people know, there are over, like particularly in the CDM, there are over 200 methodologies. So asking that very specific question on the factors really varies. It really varies on like what you're doing, the different methodology that you're taking. And a lot of the standards also borrow from these methodologies. So you'll find that Verra and Gold Standard tend to have a lot of methodologies that are already approved in CDM. So I know there's quite a few more questions, but let's take a short break because we do have a lot to cover and one more presentation that's going to go into the verification process, which is usually not quite well understood. So it's really important for countries like Kenya to really understand how it's a very important aspect. But before that, I'd just like to invite Diana, who will just give us a very brief rain break, just to take a bit of a break. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So this is our brain break session. This is where we take a break from the learning part of the session. It's been a long one, but very interesting discussion, and I think a dynamic chat. So let's just shift our brains to take a break. And if you're comfortable, I'll ask you to please put on your video. I think we gave notice yesterday. Please put on your video if you can. If you can't, I will ask you to stand up from where you are. Thank you for those putting on their videos. Stand up where you are and just, just engage some physical stretching. If you can stretch, if you can just walk around, just to relax and to just get your mind relaxed before we go into the next session. Thank you. And so for our brain break today, we have a running theme. Please keep on standing. I'll ask if you could keep on standing if you can. Sorry, I had to sit down to check on the questions for our brain break today. We will have 2 climate change lifestyle choices, and these are a cross comparison of 2016 climate actions as recommended by UNEP. And these are just practical steps urging us if each one of us can reduce carbon pollution. And today's question are, and you either keep standing or sit down depending on your choice. So sit down if you would rather stop or reduce eating meat for a year, or stop or keep standing if you would stop buying clothes for 1 year. You could also put in your answer in the chat. So for your consideration, would you rather stop or reduce eating meat for a year, let's say red meat, or would you rather stop buying clothes for 1 year? Okay, thank you. Thank you. I can see the chat coming in, and I will call on 2 people. I think Emmanuel, could you tell us what your choice was and why? You can unmute.
I think I'll stop buying clothes for 1 year. I have enough clothes. So about the meat, I don't think I'll stop eating meat. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Remember, there's no right or wrong answers. And thank you. Yes, we can take a seat now. Yes, Karaoke Miner wants to explain. Karaoke, please, if you come on, please put on your video just 1 minute, and then I'll call on 2 ladies. It'll be interesting. If not, Sharon Kinyanjui, please put on your video and just tell us what your choice was.
Thank you, Diana. I think I'll stop eating meat. Or rather reduce. Clothes. Yeah, I'll continue buying clothes. Life is short, but yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Diana.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. Yeah, actually, I just wanted to hand it over to you. I think we have a presenter next. David, I don't know if he's joined us already.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Great, David.
Yep. So David is joining us from TÜV Nord. So David, if you want, I'll just project your. So TÜV Nord is an auditing company that has been involved for many, many years, working in validation and verification exercises. So David, if you want to introduce yourself, and then I'll project your slides on this side.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Bianca, for inviting me to speak on behalf of all DOEs, I believe, all auditing firms. My name is David Lubanga, and I'm a Kenyan. I've been working for TÜV Nord, which is one of the leading auditing firms in this space for the last 10 years, actually, 10 and a half years. And yeah, so I am a senior assessor. I take care of their interests and their projects on the continent. Next slide, please. Yeah, so basically, I'm just going to focus on the 3 crediting mechanisms or standards, if you will. And these are the 3 main ones, but I'll be referring mostly to UNFCCC DOEs, that term, but take it as we are referred as VVBs, and Vera also refers to us as VVBs. So I can say DOE, but it just means all auditing firms. So basically, as from what Tim said before, we are an integral part of the carbon industry and the carbon project cycle. From the chart, you could see that we come in at number 4 and number 7, and we are completely indispensable and very integral for the process. So if you want to become an auditing firm, there are so many different types of auditing firms, and it could be accounting firms, engineering firms, accreditation firms, consulting firms, even you, as long as you have the competencies as per the accreditation standards. So I'm just going to be a bit faster because of time. Next slide, please. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Oh,
we can't see you, but we can hear you. Yeah.
You can't see me.
No.
I do not know why.
Okay.
I do not know why you can't see me.
The camera is pointed to the ceiling or the wall, I think. Maybe that's
Oh, okay. Maybe I should do this, perhaps.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Bit up. It would be good.
Yeah, like that.
Great.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So as auditors, we are accredited by the standards and also the programs, like we have the United Nations Forum Convention on Climate Change, which is largely compliance. And we also have voluntary standards like the Gold Standard and Vera. And so anybody can register a project under all those standards, as it was said before. And then you need third-party assessment or third-party opinions regarding your project. So what is the role of third-party auditing? From that project cycle, you could see that projects do generate tradable emission reductions. They're termed very differently as CERs by CDM, VR by Gold Standard, verified carbon units, emission reduction units by JI, and so on. So that is 1 ton equivalent of CO2 that is avoided or reduced. And so third-party verifiers will come in after you've conceptualized your project. You have recruited a consultant who understands the whole thing, who has guided you through the process, and now it's time to go through and pick a standard and pick a certification body or an auditing firm like us, and then proceed with the validation of your project. So basically, as defined by the UNFCCC, as an example, A DOE, for example, is an independent auditor accredited by the CDM Executive Board, designated to validate projects or verify them, implemented projects that have achieved greenhouse gas reductions. So what is validation? Assessing whether a project meets the eligibility criteria, requirements, and all other requirements for registration. Verification is verifying that emission reductions have occurred from a registered project, and you certify as appropriate, accurate, and recommend that carbon credits can be issued based on the evidence presented before you. So basically, DOEs are right in the middle. So we have investors or project proponents and consultants on one side, and then we have the certification bodies on the other. So there is no way you can jump that step, either for validation or verification. So the whole concept is to give investors, private buyers, public entities, even the general public, confidence that any amount, carbon credits out there have been generated and have been accurately measured and calculated, and whatever is reported there is correct. So whether it's a compliance market or voluntary market, they need to have confidence that that has been checked by a third party, an independent third party. So we don't do consultation. We're not allowed to do consultation, but we are allowed to audit based on the evidence and also to make comments that can lead to the improvement of the project. Yeah, so that is basically it. In the Paris Agreement, we have, we don't know, it's not clear yet what the role of auditors would be in the new dispensation, but I've seen with the African Development Bank, we have something called the Certified Adaptation Benefits from the adaptation, from adaptation projects. So we are yet to see clearly what the role of third-party auditing firms will be going forward. Well, otherwise, we will continue doing auditing of projects that are already existing, implemented, or through the voluntary market. Next, please. So I'll focus on CDM because usually if you're accredited by the CDM, you are immediately accredited by the others because the process is very rigorous. The requirements are the same. And I'll just go quickly through that. So basically, you need to be a registered entity accredited by the national or international law. You need to have financial. Someone is talking. So you need to have financial stability, and you need to have liability too. I'll explain that later. Then you need to have a management structure. You need to have integrity, basically ensure that your processes are without, they're impartial, they're confidential, and when required, and there's no conflict of interest, because this is an audit, and auditing is a rigorous process, and you do not want any questions raised in between. So you need to have sufficient human resources, basically competencies, to take care of all the projects that have been, not all projects, because some auditing firms are accredited just for a few types of projects based on the team they present and their competencies and all that. So we call them sectoral scopes. In the case of TÜV-Nord or TÜV-Nord, if you will, we are accredited for all scopes. So we have all the processes, and we have teams, either internal or external, to take care of all the projects that are put forward. You need a quality management system, and you also need a complaint and dispute and appeals process. So basically, the VCS and the GS and all the other standards, once you are accredited by the CDM, they have similar requirements. And if you're not accredited by the CDM, there are many ways to get accredited, which also includes their own processes. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, so for GS, there's an additional requirement where an auditor, to get accredited for GS projects, you need to do an exam. So all those auditors that are presented to the GS as able to validate or verify their projects, they need to do an online exam and be certified auditor. Next, please. For Verra, they are in their website. They say if you're accredited by the UNFCCC, then you'll be automatically accredited by Vera or any other standards organization like IAF, ONAC, or SCC, Canada. Yeah, so basically in the case of CDM, if I'll focus on CDM, there are guidance documents. So guidance documents for each standard or scheme is, they can be found on their respective websites. There's a CDM project cycle procedure, CDM project cycle procedure for a project, standalone project activities or programs of activities, which is POS. CDM standard for project activities and standard for POS. We also have validation of verification standard for project activities and POS. Those are programs of activities. And we also have other guidelines like tools, guidelines for small scale sampling and all that. All these can be found in their respective websites. Let's move, please. So my next two slides will be dealing with the validation process and verification. And I could appreciate that there was a bit of confusion there. Yeah, the three focused standards that I'm saying I'm focusing on today are the CDM, the gold standard, administered by the Gold Standard Foundation, and Vera, administered by the, VCS, the Verified Carbon Standard, administered by Vera. And they'll say validation, GS will say project design certification. Please don't be confused by these terms. So basically, you've conceptualized your project, you've recruited a consultant, they have guided you through the process, you've completed the project design documents, you have even selected a standard. And now you've picked up a methodology and completed the documents and present, and all the documents required. There's a checklist of documents required for CDM, there's a letter of approval, there's modalities of communication, there's LSA report, there's EIA report, if required by the host country. So you identify, you go to the website to see approved accredited entities. In the CDM website, there is there. In Gold Standard, also we have approved VVBs, and in Vera the same. So you see whether they are approved for that scope, for that type of project, and if they are, you can send requests for auditing services. And once you agree with one of them who is accredited for that scope, you will forward the documents. They'll look at the documents, they look at the PDB, the whole concept, the description of the project, either the technology or the measure. And they will look at the supporting documentation, and then they will decide whether to request for more documents or whether your project meets the eligibility and other requirements for validation. So you will sign a contract. You need to have a contract directly with the project proponent or owner. And then you'll select a team based on the type of scope that the project falls in. And then you'll sign the contract, send an audit plan, whether you're going to do a physical site visit or not, but you still need an audit plan. And then you can agree on the timelines of validation. So what do we check? If I use the example of CDM, we have to check. Someone is speaking. We'll have to check that your project, all sections of the PDD or PD, in the case of Vera, are completed. You've selected the right methodology, your approach, and your monitoring plan is correct. Then we can prepare any findings, any mistakes, any issues that we have with the project, and then we'll send it to you as preliminary findings. Then we can agree, most of them require site visits, on timelines on when to do the site visits. And so during the site visit, we'll come and look at your plan. Remember, we have already looked at the project eligibility, whether there is a baseline. You can say, I need to install a solar power plant in a certain area. We need to know whether there's a baseline there. Usually the baseline is identified. We have to know whether something existed on that particular area. And then we need to see how you've applied the methodology, the tools, the guidelines, and the calculation process. So when we go on site, we have to see whether the project is implemented. And if it's not, back and forth where you try to resolve the findings. And then once all the findings are resolved, we will give a final report. And that final report you're going to review, and then we'll send it for technical review. And once it passes an independent technical review, which is done by senior assessors, very qualified people up in the DOE's offices, then we'll submit that and recommend for registration. So that is basically, in a nutshell, how validation goes. You have to be eligible and you have to follow all the guidelines and you have to complete the documents, all sections. And we have to look at all the supporting information. If there's an EIA required, if it has been completed according to guidelines, if there's a local stakeholder consultation, if you've obtained a letter of approval, if it's authentic, all these things, we have to look at them and then we'll write a report based on that, including calculations using the methodology selected, and they have to be appropriate methodologies. Your monitoring plan has to be very consistent as described by the methodology. All the quality and quality control procedures have to be in place and your personnel to monitor your project. So it's a rigorous process. So basically at the end of it all, we'll give a positive or negative validation opinion. Most of them have a positive opinion. And then we recommend that for registration. And then it will go through the process by the standard and register. Now, next slide, please. Now, verification also comes once you've implemented the project. You followed all the procedures that are in the project design document. Now you will identify another DOE or another auditing firm, or the same if it's a small scale project. And then you will say, I've implemented my project. Now I have monitored the project and I need to do verification of the project. So you'll go through the same process of signing contracts and sending the documents. We look at the documents. If it's, for example, it's a power plant and you've been sending invoices to the grid, you've been selling electricity there, then we look at all those documents and the generation data and all that. Then we will come on site. We'll look at the project, whether it is deviated from what it was described, and whether the monitoring procedures have been followed. And we look at the strength of all the evidences. We have to look at the completeness and consistency of everything. Any pending issues from validation have been covered. And then we will sit down, write any findings and do draft reporting. And then you will resolve all the issues that are raised. And then you're going to get the final report, which will go through a technical review. Then we will submit it and request for issuance of carbon credits. So basically that is a procedure. And once we give an opinion, we issue a verification report, which is a verification certification report. Then they will be issued by the standards organization, whether it's a CDM or a Gold Standard or Plan Vivo. And then you can go to the market and sell your carbon credits. Each carbon credit, as said, is 1 metric ton of CO2 equivalent. So that is basically how we quantify that. We have the other standards like GS, which want to start to quantify also or report SDGs, other benefits besides mitigation of carbon emissions. So all these things have to be followed to the letter. All the parameters in the monitoring plan have to be monitored. All the data has to be correct. The calculations have to be correct. Then we will write a report accordingly. And then you're going to have your carbon credits, which you can sell out there in the international local market, depending on which you pick. So I think that is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, which I've done relatively quickly because of time, you can find me in the contacts provided. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, David. And I think as we're, I think getting prepared also for the next session. I think the messaging to come through to people is that this is just a very robust, standardized process governed by procedures, internationally recognized methodologies, and that all of the work that you undertake as David has very clearly presented, has to be cross-checked by a third party. So this is an independent position. The company that David represents is very much within this space of offering or putting forward that independent position. And the messaging really is that, yeah, that in order to start moving towards registering that project and issuing those carbon credits, ultimately, it is an investment decision that requires quite a lot of financial outlay, and is a very robust process that you need to be willing to follow through with those steps and ensure that as you go through those steps, you meet the requisite requirements, procedures, and standards. And then maybe just moving away from that, just to note that, yeah, I guess, David, I don't know whether you have an opinion, but whether or not your field of work will be expanding as we move forward, or whether there's a need for more auditors on the ground within this part of the world as well. Do you have an opinion on that, David?
That remains unclear, but considering from where I sit,
yeah,
I could reasonably argue that I'm one of the very few auditors on the continent, if not the only one.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of room, and with the regulations and everything coming forth after the Paris Agreement, going forward, especially with a new focus on adaptation, so there'll be, as I said, adaptation, certified adaptation benefits. And I'm not so sure whether that will be purely accounting firms based on investments made, or it will also include a technical aspect, which is what we take care of. But it is clear that the voluntary market is expanding rapidly, and there will be a lot of opportunities for people to work as auditors if they are qualified. And so as of now, I can say there is optimism, especially in the voluntary side, because the CDM now is finished. And yeah, so hopefully going forward, they'll define our roles much more clearly, and then we can have a rough idea of how things will pan out going forward.
Okay. Thanks. And I mean, I think a positive message maybe for some of the aspiring young professionals in the room. And then Bianca, I think you had one question as well for David. And just to confirm before Bianca asks, because Emmanuel, yes, the slides will be made available. Yeah. Bianca?
Yes, as the panelists get ready. So maybe if you could let us know in terms of the companies, because now you know that this is something that we really lacked, whereby all the DOEs tend to be from companies that are based abroad, or they're owned by, the headquarters is like based in other countries. So in terms of local companies actually becoming DOEs, in terms of the financial stability that you mentioned beforehand, what does that look like? Is it medium to large, or is it just large companies that would be able to handle that at the moment? Because this is something we'd like to promote. And then in terms of the auditors as well, which is now very specific to young people, like in your past experience, how many audits would they have to go through? How many exams? Do we need to form programs to actually get verifying auditors? Yeah, so just on those two issues, on the finance and the actual auditing exams.
Yeah, accreditation fees, I would say they're relatively high, but if you look at consulting firms, especially established environmental consultants, they can have an arm of a DOE, an auditing arm for the carbon industry. They don't, that means they don't need to have a new management structure. They don't have to have a new QM system. They have a financial base, and they also, I mentioned liability because sometimes auditing firms can be held liable for wrongly issued credits. So you need to have a security of some kind. But this financial backing or financial stability is required because you can recruit competent staff, you can have systems in place, you can do so many different things, and you can't do that if you're a completely new auditing firm. It is challenging because of, first of all, the nature of the market for now, but I'm sure the only DOE we had on the continent was Carbon Check, and they moved to India. I'm sure with the right investment and with the whole new dispensation going forward and opportunities arising, DOEs will either fetch base here, either from abroad, or local DOEs will people will invest in auditing in the industry. So, and also in the aspect of training, it was very tough at the beginning. The requirements were very high, and I'm talking specifically here with the CDM before the voluntary market grew, and so the requirements were very tough because of the toughness of the job, to make sure that all carbon credits issued are credible, they are measurable, they are real. You cannot afford to have people who are not well trained. So most DOEs, or let's say auditing firms, have their own internal training systems and hierarchical structure in which you start as a trainee, you go all the way to a senior assessor like me, which has taken a while. Each standard I've not seen very specific, but for me, as long as I'm qualified for CDM, I will be qualified for all the others, which was a rigorous process back then. But over time, if you have industry knowledge, like you've been working, for example, for KenGen, you have renewable energy expertise, you just need that scheme knowledge of carbon industry, and then you are able to audit projects, because it is just mathematics and calculations here and there that and other things that are required, which you can read from guidance documents. So people who want to become auditors will either have a few years in the industry, in the specific industry, if it's waste, if it's renewable energy, or they'll have to be trained with their degrees. They'll have to go through training where they'll have to attend, they'll have to go through in-person internal training in a company, in an auditing firm, and then they'll have to go to a few projects where they'll be just team members, then will become assessors, then lead assessors, and they'll become senior assessors. So the requirements are rigorous, but they're not impossible for those who are interested.
Thank you. And just a clarification. So for those who do have degrees, is it a range like engineering, science, or is it very specific?
I've seen people with just environmental sciences, which is not exactly engineering. I've seen people with electrical engineering, others in, like in my case, chemical engineering, you know. So ultimately, you just need to be numerate. You need to be able to work with programs like Excel, and you need to be able to have mathematical skills, and you also have to have a bit of chemistry and physics. And basically, if you have a degree, means you can do something if you're trained on it. And as we have methodologies and tools that have to be followed to the letter. And if you can follow those methodologies, anybody can do the job. So yeah, most people are not really informed in the carbon industry. They can do other jobs very well, but they can also be trained and then they can join the auditing business.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I will now hand over to Julie, just because of time. We are very, very tight on time at the moment, but I'll just hand over to the Carbon Africa team. And thank you very much, David. I'm sure it's been very new for a lot of people, and it's good. It's a good opportunity moving forward. Over to you, Julie.
Thanks, Bianca. So my name is Julie Aguko, as you've been told. I work with Carbon Africa Limited here in Nairobi. So we manage carbon market portfolios. We help with the carbon reduction, emission reduction calculations. We do project development for renewable energy projects, so on and so forth. And on this presentation, I saw a couple of questions coming about what the carbon market landscape looks like in Kenya. So this is basically what I'm going to present as of now. So the first slide, okay, sorry. So the topics we are going to cover are on the the carbon market profiles, which was an assessment, a study we did for that Carbon Africa took part in. We did it for the Eastern Africa Alliance countries, which are Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Sudan, Ethiopia, Burundi, and Rwanda. There were 7 countries. And then we are going to talk about the CDM portfolio, the CDM portfolio in Kenya, And then we're going to look at the voluntary carbon markets, what has happened in Kenya thus far. So on the carbon market profiles, like I say, they were profiles developed for the Eastern Africa Alliance member states, and they're available online on the East Africa Alliance page, on the knowledge page. I think you can easily find them online. And the profiles, they present an overview of the portfolios, both CDM and the voluntary standards. And then they present also initial engagements on new market mechanisms and Article 6. So the way the profiles were developed were using publicly available data. The UNFCCC provided the CDM data. The UNEP DTU also provided the CDM data. So we use both databases to develop the profiles. And then we use the gold standard database, and it provided the VCM data. We used Vera and Plan Vivo databases to also develop the voluntary carbon markets. So under CDM, the CDM in Kenya, the earliest registration, the first project was the 35 megawatt based project by Mumias Sugar that has since expired. And as at December 2020, Kenya has the largest CDM portfolio of registered activities. So in total, we have about 412 CDM projects, and this was as at December 2020. I'd just like to point out that the standards databases are live, the projects constantly being registered, their issuances regularly ongoing. So the profiles were developed as of December 2020, and at that time, Kenya had the largest CDM portfolio of the registered activities in Eastern Africa. And of the total, we have 189 registered activities. We have 20 project activities, and I think Tim mentioned the difference between the activities. And we have 24 POAs, program of activities. And under the umbrella, team referred to them as an umbrella. Under the 24 umbrellas, we have 169 smaller projects within the POAs. And a total of 1.6 million certified emission reductions have been issued under CDM. And for this, out of the 1.6 million issued, the highest has been observed for the cook stoves, and followed by the water purification projects. So the cook stoves that are under the POAs, and the water purification also under the POAs. So, and just to note, if you'd like to know more about how that has happened, the POA with the largest issuance is BioLite. It's an improved cook stoves POA, and it has about 47 smaller projects under the POA. And we have the water purification POA, which is the water purification POA, which is referred to as Impact. So you can also look further into that. They're quite interesting projects. And under the PAs, the project activities, we have grid-connected geothermal activities, which are majorly owned by KenGen. And we have the run of hydro projects also under the PAs, which are owned by KenGen as well. So under the voluntary carbon markets, we have about 61 as of December. Again, I repeat, as of December 2020, we had 61 voluntary carbon market activities. All these are registered and certified. And the 61 projects have issued a total of 26 million credits, which is much higher than what has been issued under CDM. So the gold standard projects, of the 61 voluntary carbon market activities, Gold Standard has certified and registered 38 projects. And the 38 projects have issued a total of 8 million verified emission reductions. Like you were told under CDM, we call them CERs, and Gold Standard, we call them VERs. So I hope that you all remember that. And for Gold Standard projects, and these are projects that have been verified by people like David, and all this, the highest projects, the highest sector has been the energy efficient cookstoves, which is clean cookstoves that overall reduce the CO2 emissions to the atmosphere. And then under Vera we also call the Verified Carbon Standard, VCS, we have a total of 22 projects. So we have 38, 22, this is 60, gives you a total of 60 VCM. And then 22 projects have issued 16 million verified carbon units. And this is majorly in the agriculture, forestry sector. And that is a total of 73%. And then we have, a very interesting standard is the Plan Vivo standard. The Plan Vivo standard, so far we have one project, is Mikoko Pamoja. And the most interesting part, Mikoko Pamoja is the world's first blue carbon project. Blue carbon projects are carbon projects in the coastal and mangrove and the wetlands area. And it was found out that the mangrove sector has a very high carbon sequestration ability. And after all that verification, Mikoko Pamoja became the world's first blue carbon project, and it's in the coastal region of Kenya. And Mikoko Pamoja has thus far issued 12,000 credits. And yes, can move to the next. So I think that about covers what has happened so far in the carbon markets in Kenya, both under CDM and the voluntary carbon market. So questions?
Great, thank you so much. Tim, over to you. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sorry, yeah, thanks. Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
And please introduce yourself as well.
Okay, hi, I'm Emmanuel. I work at Kenya Forest Service. Okay, my question is about the stoves and also these technological innovations that have come up. My question is, are there like technological need assessments that are carried out before these innovations are rolled out into the markets?
Maybe I can, Julie Jones try, or I can answer?
So you're asking if there were, yes, for under the standards, under all the standards, there has to be, there's something we call methodologies, and there are standards, there are predefined standards that all these projects have to meet, and then you have to come out, okay, sorry, stop share. Okay, yeah, there are predefined the standards, and there are predefined methodologies, and there are predefined technological expectations that these projects have to meet before being issued with projects. And this is something you develop under the PDD. When you're coming up with the PDD, I think you will state all the technological choices you're going to make for the project and the overall impact the project is going to make. And once it is approved, that is when this issuances come about. That is when you can get the certified emission reductions, unless Tim wants to answer further.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think maybe the question is if there's needs assessment. I mean, on individual basis, businesses will align themselves with national interests, and they themselves will do their viability assessments at the business or the activity level. They'll do investment studies, etc. It's not necessarily that the country itself has to have a master plan or a needs assessment around a particular intervention. It's a little bit more market driven in the case of cookstoves, I think. But clearly when a business is setting up or coming into the market, or setting up a new business or setting up a project that is to be implemented, they will clearly do this having done a study within the context of the country, its policies, its regulations, the market context, etc. I don't know whether that answers the question. There was one, I think, about Plan Vivo. Yeah, I guess the markets are open and it just so happens that Plan Vivo is a fairly specific market or a fairly specific standard, sorry, that targets particularly kind of land use and community engagement. And that might be the reason why there's just one particular project in that regard. Do all these carbon projects registered in Kenya belong to an association? What does it take to register one or belong to one specifically for carbon markets in Kenya? No, there is no carbon markets association, though Bianca might be able to just reiterate that the alliance does now exist. It's a fairly new alliance that's been established, and it's definitely one organization under which interested parties can consolidate their experiences and understanding. For example, this training. Bianca, I don't know whether you want to say anything on that.
Yes, I think, yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think just the way we mentioned yesterday, we do work with different types of stakeholders. So we do a lot of work with private sector in terms of project developers, but also just other organizations that would be interested in having carbon projects. So some NGOs, you know, the likes of HEVOS have had like a huge portfolio and they've participated in the past. So it's really about if your organization is interested, so existing and aspiring. So we work with both in terms of just bringing the knowledge to the forefront. So like what we're doing today, which is primarily targeted at young professionals, we tend to have sessions that are a bit more advanced for private sector and those who have been in the industry for some time. But we're always trying to accommodate different levels of understanding, and we understand it's a place that it's growing. So every stakeholder is important. So the more we can reach out and the more we can help in this area, that's our job. So I think I'll just stop there for now before I go on too much.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Bianca. There's some interesting questions coming in around charcoal stoves, etc. And maybe I'll just use that as a way to segue into the panel. I've just got this slide up. I appreciate, sorry, there's been a bit of a change in the schedule. I should just mention that we've, yeah, unfortunately not managed our time too well again, but it means that the discourse has been fairly rich, I think. So the emissions reductions calculation that we mentioned at the beginning, we will take that up hopefully tomorrow, but we'll get back to you on that. But it means now that we'll go straight into the panel discussion, which if we follow the trajectory through the day, we've looked at the project cycle, the processes around developing a carbon project, the core components that need to be taken into consideration when going through that cycle. And then we've had a particular look at the process of auditing, third-party verification from the presentation from David. And to give it a little bit more context, Julia's now kind of given an overarching context with regards to the pipeline, what kind of projects has been developed. And there's quite a rich discussion going on in the chat regarding that portfolio. And what we've done to bring this session to a conclusion is then to invite 3 project developers or project owners from varying sectors. So we're looking at forestry, grid-connected electricity, and distributed energy access projects as well. Unfortunately, Dr. Mambi, who's on the screen from the government, can't join us, but she was with us yesterday. So we'll have 3 short interventions from those quite distinct sectors, to give an overview of the projects within the region. So I think what I'll do is I'll just remove this panel so that we can see the people speaking. But maybe I can start with Christina and look at the forestry side of things. So Christina, hopefully you're with us.
I am. Thank you.
Good.
Can you hear me okay?
So maybe yeah, perfectly. So maybe I'll just ask you, a very simple question. Please introduce yourself, introduce the institution you represent, and then tell us a little bit about your portfolio, your pipeline of projects, and how you engage with carbon credits as well, or carbon emission reductions.
Sure, happy to do so. And thanks for the invitation. I've been following today's session. It was very, I think, informative, and it provides a very good background for folks that are new and wanting to develop and pursue a career in this. Just, I guess, very briefly to introduce myself, I'm Christina Ender, the Regional Climate Change Director for Conservation International, based in Nairobi. I have Conservation International is an international NGO operating in over 30 countries, and globally, and our headquarters, so regional headquarters, are here in Nairobi. I have been, I think Bianca also asked that I just very briefly summarize how I've started to work on this. I originally did a master's in biodiversity conservation management in 2010 and moved to Kenya early 2012. So I'm in my 10th year now, working on REDD+ on climate ever since I arrived. So I would love to speak about the project specifically that we are working on, and which is in the land sector and the forestry sector. And I think it might be helpful to just give a little bit of an overview of the concept of REDD+, which is the concept of reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. And the plus stands for 3 additional activities that acknowledge the role of sustainable forest management, enhancing forest carbon stock, and the conservation of forests. So that you might have heard of REDD+ projects, which is what this acronym stands for. And it is focused in the land sector, specifically the forestry sector. So CI we have been, as I said, operating have our regional office here. And over the last 6 to 7 years, we've really expanded our reach in the region. And about coming close to 10 years ago, we started to work on a project in the Chulu Hills. But maybe, and I'll go and dive into this in a little bit, but I just thought also it would be helpful just to explain a bit more that this concept of REDD+ originated in 2005 at the UNFCCC climate negotiations. And it's with objective to mitigating climate change through reducing greenhouse gas emissions in developing countries. REDD+ has always been intended to be rolled out on the national scale, and countries are pursuing to still do so, to getting the elements in place, what needs to be put in place. But in the meantime, over the last decade and more, we've had these individual forest carbon projects come up. And so actually the first VCS, so former, which is now Verra, and CCB, the Climate Community and Biodiversity Standard, verified carbon project globally was actually verified in Kenya, which is the Kasigao Corridor, Wildlife Corridor REDD+ project down in Tsavo. And as I said, the other project that I will delve in a little bit more right now is the Chulu Hills, which is actually the largest forest carbon project in Kenya. And I'll provide a little bit of more details on that. So the Chulu Hills is the Chulu Hills REDD+ project. The original start date was officially in 2013. And it spans over 410,000 hectares in southern Kenya. So it spans over 3 counties, Makueni County, Kajiado County, and a little bit into Taita Taveta. So it really, as the name says, it's located around the Chulu Hills near Amboseli, between Amboseli and Tsavo. The project itself is fully owned by Kenyans, by something, it's a consortium of 9 entities that formed the Chulu Hills Conservation Trust. And that is actually 4 Maasai group branches, 3 local NGOs, and 2 government entities, so the Kenya Forest Service and Kenya Wildlife Service. So they formed an entity and they are the project proponent. They own this project and the carbon the carbon and the emission reductions, the credits that are generated in this. So CI's role, Conservation International role, actually, we've been supporting the project. We are an advisory member to the board. We have no voting power, but we've provided financial and technical and strategic guidance to this project. The project was verified, validated and verified under the VCS standard and CCB, as I mentioned, and it was using the methodology of VCS called VM0009. As I think it was mentioned, there's a lot of different methodologies out there. And in terms of the emission reduction potential, or the number of credits it actually generates per year, it has the potential on average to generate on average 600,000 tons, so 600,000 tons of credits per year. So the first verification was actually covering the monitoring period from the start date in 2013 to end of 2016. And it received over 2 million credits during that period. And the project is now undergoing another audit to cover the time period between 2017 up till now. So I think I'm not sure about timing, but maybe I just wanted to also highlight that, as I mentioned, now with the Paris Agreement in place, and the REDD+ national process also advancing, and these individual projects having been coming into existence and operating sort of on their own terms with their own standards, their own methodologies, selling into the voluntary carbon market. But with these developments, with the national REDD+ process advancing and the Paris Agreement, there will now need to be a process to align or harmonize and integrate these standalone projects into a national system. One of the main reasons for that is that we need to avoid double counting of emission reductions and to ensure environmental integrity. And so this process is called, we refer to it as REDD+ nesting. So nesting or aligning, harmonizing these activities into an overall national system, so that we are very clear how many emission reduction units are actually being generated, as well as being very transparent of where they're being sold and transacted, if they're contributing or will be contributing to Kenya's NDC, etc. And maybe just allow me to finish on just saying that we've seen on the private, as I said, these projects have been selling on the voluntary carbon market. And over the last decade, it has gone up and crashed. But over the last about 2 years and a bit, we've seen an enormous increase in demand from the private sector, wanting to and being ready to invest significant quantities of finance into these types of projects, especially into the natural climate solutions. And so there's really, as Bianca summarized, there's the need to have external finance for Kenya to achieve its NDCs, which forestry and the land sector is obviously a huge part in this. And then in addition, other climate finance sources are, and I think you'll be diving into this tomorrow, Article 6, as well as the new market from the aviation sector called the Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation. I know that's a long term, called CORSIA, but they have indicated that under that new market, which is outside of the UNFCCC, there will be huge demand for offsets or credits from all different sectors, including the land sector. However, all of these demands and emerging markets come with some requirements. And as we've heard just before, that they need to meet rigorous standards. And so I think under this REDD+ nesting process, we are working currently with the government and other stakeholders to help align all of these and to be able to meet these new emerging standards that are speaking to these new criteria. So I think I'll stop. I'm
Thank you.
somewhat in the time. Thank you.
No, thanks. Sorry, our timekeeping is a bit off, to be honest, but it's our fault, so you shouldn't take that pressure. But look, I think as a concrete look at what we've been trying to do today is just to understand the successes to date, what you've been through. So look, we have an NGO operational within the Kenyan context, working with Kenyan community groups. We've developed forestry carbon assets, let's put them in those terms, have successfully registered under a selected standard because that is aligned with that sector, the VERA, the Voluntary Carbon Standard, has successfully issued 2 million credits. And I guess the audit you're currently going through is looking at potentially kind of double that number. So another 3 to 4 million coming into the pipeline for pre-2020. So yeah, real successes up until the end of 2020. But as you've highlighted, we'll go into more of those details tomorrow around what carbon markets look like under the Paris Agreement and how assets will be taken moving forwards under that. So thanks for that concrete context. I think just with one eye on the time, moving on to the next speaker. I don't know if it's Sally or Lillian or both of you from Climate Care, but we've had a look at forestry, and now the idea is to look at the projects that Climate Care has been developing. Sally or Lillian, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Lillian, great.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Lillian Kagume. I work with Climate Care as a project analyst, and I'm going to take you through a brief presentation. I'm just sharing my screen, or Bianca, you can share for me. Okay.
Sorry, just 1 second. I'll let you do it.
So great. So as I mentioned, we work with Climate Care. You can move to the next slide, and I'll highlight briefly about what we do. So Climate Care is dedicated to tackling climate change and improving lives. And our main thing is we help organizations to take responsibility for their climate action. And we achieve this through financing, developing, and managing carbon reduction projects across the world. Our main office is based in Oxford in the UK. And we also have an office here in Nairobi. So for me and Sally, we are based here in Nairobi. And so far, we have helped to create a voluntary carbon market pioneered by Carbon Finance for community development projects. And we have a very rich portfolio of projects mixed across the globe. And as a leading organization, we also work with governments to solve complex climate and sustainability issues. We are also B Corp certified, and we've been recognized as setting the highest standards in the carbon market industry. So you can move to the next slide. So far, we have achieved, our target so far has been to achieve at least 43 million tons of CO2 reductions. And currently we have upgraded this target to 50 million tons. And also collectively, we have improved at least 41 million lives. And for this, we use a very complex methodology to estimate how many lives we have improved through the various project portfolio that we engage in. So we were founded in 1997, and we have achieved quite a lot up to date, with the current one being our new target of delivering at least 50 million tons of carbon emission reductions and improving 50 million livelihoods by 2025. So because for the interest of time, I'll not go in details through our achievements across the years, and I will jump directly to our Climate Care Kenya focus areas. So the main one, we have different projects, carbon asset development projects, which are spread across 2 standards. We have, in the last presentation with Lubanga, he went through the details about the CDM and GS. So our projects are basically under the CDM, where we have some exclusive projects. These are projects that we don't only develop the carbon credits, but we also have the exclusive rights to market and buy the carbon credits generated from the project. So for this, we have 2 projects. We have a POA called Cooklin, basically an improved cook stove project based in Kenya and Ghana. And we have an ethanol stoves project. We also have, under the gold standard, one of our biggest projects called JAC, based in Ghana, which is a plan based here in Kenya and Aquaclara. And we have another upcoming POA called Greenway that will be in India, and Sacogas, which is an LPG, a very interesting carbon project that we are currently developing, and which is a BRICS project. The carbon, these are projects where we just develop the carbon. Sorry, I lost connection a bit, sorry. So yeah, we are saying for CAD only, we have a portfolio under Coordinative Energy. This is a project developer with a mix of different projects across the world. We also do origination and sourcing and consultancy work, but for the purposes of this presentation, I'll just focus on the CAD. So next slide, please. So to achieve our objectives, we work with different partners across the world, such as 14 Trees, we have Aquaclara, we have BAN, Arup, Jaguar, Sacogas, Relief International, the World Bank, and we also work with governments such as the government of Kenya, the government of Sudan, and the Swedish government. Next slide, please. So our main CAD projects portfolio is a mix of different projects, as I had highlighted. I'll go one by one. So the first one is we have a safe water supply project called the Aquaclara project. It's based here in Kenya. It's under the gold standard, and currently we are under the 7th monitoring period. So far, the project has generated around 186 tons of CO2. And it's currently undergoing the 4th monitoring, where we are expecting around 1.2 million tons, but currently we have an issuance of around 4 million tons. We have BAN Stoves project based here in Kenya. This is an improved cook stove project under the gold standard. It's also currently under the 3rd monitoring. And so far we have generated around 1.1 million tons. We have a very unique project called the Durabrick project based in Malawi. It's a stabilized blocks project under the gold standard. And we are doing the 2nd monitoring. So far we have generated around 9,000 tons of CO2s. The Greenway Stoves project is based in Ghana. It's an improved cook stoves project under the gold standard. The project just got listed recently, and we have an estimated annual issuance of around 76,000 tons. Then we have now a new Aquaclara project, because for the Aquaclara project, we are almost through with the first crediting period. So we are moving now to developing a new project, which is under the gold standard. And the listing process is ongoing, and we have an estimated annual issuance of around 6,000 tons. And we are currently preparing for quotations and the listing of the project, 3,000 tons. Then we have the Clean Cook Stoves project. This is our exclusive project based in Kenya and Ghana. This is under the CDM. We are currently in the 8th monitoring period, and the project has so far generated 748,000 tons. We have another unique project called the Ethanol Stoves project. This is an ethanol stoves project based in Kenya. This is a GSCDM project whereby the issuance is made at the CDM, and under the gold standard, we only seek the labeling. We are currently preparing for the 4th verification, and so far the project has generated around 156,000 tons. And finally, I had mentioned about the Native Energy Safe Water Supply project portfolio. This is a mix of different POAs in Southeast Asia, Central America, and West and East Africa. And the projects are based in Honduras, Haiti, India, Ghana, Ethiopia, and also here in Kenya. It's a gold standard project. And currently we have generated around 293,000 tons. These are micro scale projects, so that's why the volume is a bit low compared to the other projects. So that's our mix of project portfolio. You see they revolve around all sectors. And yeah, we are happy that we are able to make an impact from this project. So I will pause there, and then my colleague Sally will take you through what we do as a card developer and also the project's opportunities and challenges. So thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. So my name is Sally. I work at Climate Care as a carbon asset developer. And I would like to take us through our roles in the CAD process, then also the challenges and opportunities in the CAD. So our main role as Climate Care is basically prepare the relevant documents, which range from the local stakeholder consultation reports, the POADD, the BPADDs, and also the monitoring reports. So we do this preparation, getting all the support documents needed from the project implementers. So we also do what we call the technical review of the documents. So basically when we take over the project, our role comes in to develop the CAD, and CAD has different stages. And when the client sends us the document, we go through them, ensuring that they meet all the standards as stated by either the gold standard or the CDM. We also control the documents by ensuring that they not only meet the standards, but they're also taken on time, and they also use the required templates. We also do the coordination of the project implementers. As Lillian has mentioned, our portfolio is quite rich, and therefore we have to kind of coordinate all the project developers and project implementers to take them basically through the training, to tell them what to prepare for, and train them on how to ensure that the projects are implemented in accordance with the gold standard or the CDM requirements. We also ensure that our projects meet the required quality under the gold standard and also the CDM. So please go to also finally, we work closely with the VVBs like Lubanga and the other VVBs to ensure that our projects go through to till issuance of the carbon credits. Please go to the next slide.
Sally, sorry can I ask you to kind of wrap up within the 1 minute, if possible?
Yes, sure.
For the last slide.
Yeah, no problem. So our main challenges revolves around the pricing of the technologies, where you realize that the clean technologies are a bit expensive and unaffordable to most, even with the credits, unfortunately, because these projects require employing of staff, monitoring, and all that. They are still unaffordable. There's also competition from cheaper solutions, which are not necessarily climate friendly or environmental friendly, which now makes it a challenge for us to market the clean technologies. Also, there's high drop of rates in the usage of the technologies, unfortunately, which means that not only do we lose credits on the projects, but also the households kind of households or institutions start reverting back to the old technologies which are not environmental friendly. Also, COVID-19 unfortunately has really affected our projects, where distribution of most of these technologies has a bit slowed down. So the opportunities that are there, some of the opportunities we've identified is the project developers can work with across different areas in Kenya, because of some of these projects are kind of limited by the project boundary. Also, another opportunities is training the communities where they work, so that they can understand the importance of using the clean technologies, not only for the benefit of the environment, but also for their own benefits. The other one is continuous design modification. This is something I've realized that greatly impacts the uptake by the households and institutions, where, for example, technology can be modified to meet the needs of the society. So I'm not sure if my time is up or I can continue.
No, we're running short on time.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, then I'll stop there, and if anyone has a question, then you can reach out.
Perfect. Thanks, Sally and Lillian. And I see there's quite a live chat going on as well, with people responding to questions directly. So that's great. Yeah, really, really sorry to push you guys also on time. Thanks for that. I mean, I think that gives you a real clear indication that the types of projects. So there's forestry, but there's also water purification, cook stoves, etc. More kind of distributed energy access or water supply projects as well. Sorry guys, yeah, we really shot over time, but I'm going to now invite Stanley for his 5 minutes. Stanley, I guess you're with us. Thanks, Sally. Thanks, Lillian.
Hi guys, I hope you can hear me. My name
Yeah,
is Stanley. Yeah, my name is Stanley Kirako, and I work with KenGen. I'm a climate change analyst, as well as a developer of carbon projects. I'll be very brief. As you can see, I'm in the field at the moment. I had made a commitment, and I didn't want to miss not to honor my commitment. So maybe if the network issues comes in, then we'll be able to see. But I hope everything will be okay. So first of all, we as KenGen, we started. I think we are the first after Mumias Sugar Company. We were the second company to start developing carbon asset projects, and we are the first company actually in KenGen to receive credits as well as revenue from sale of carbon assets or let's say emission reductions. So the moment we have a portfolio of 6 projects, 3 of them are geothermal, then we have 2 hydro projects, and we have 1 wind project. And in total, these projects on an annual basis, with our with the baseline we're using and considering the grid emission factor, our estimation is on annual basis we are able to reduce emissions of about 1.4 million. So it's 1.4 million tons of CERs or carbon equivalent, carbon dioxide equivalent. So we started our project in the year 2010, and our first project was Olkaria 2. Olkaria 2 is a 35 megawatt project. It was an additional unit. We have done 5 verifications, and as we say today, we were given the 6th verification was issued today of 309,495. That was issued today. The second project which came in also during that almost the same time was Tana hydro project, which is a capacity addition of 20 megawatts. We also have Kiambere hydro project. Still, it was an optimization of 24 megawatts. That was in 2011 and 2012. Then also in 2012, we had 2 projects, Olkaria 4, which support 140 megawatts, a geothermal project. Olkaria 1 AU, it's Olkaria 1 additional unit 4 and 5, which is also 140 megawatts. Then in 2014, we brought in Ngong Phase 1, which is a 5.1 megawatt project. So we have undertaken several verifications. Last year, we were issued CERs in 2020 for Ngong, which was around 23,000. Then we had Kiambere, which was around 123,000. Then for Tana, it was around 58,000. We are still pursuing registering more projects, but as you all know, we have challenges with the discussions and in the Paris Agreement has not been concluded, and we hope in COP26 coming this year, maybe there will be a way forward, either on transitioning projects or credits or adoption of Article 6.4. So in short, those are our carbon projects, as I mentioned, and our technologies which we use. And as a project developer, just on the to close, there are still there are challenges everywhere. And one of the biggest challenges which we face, and anyone who develops carbon projects will all the time be in mind, is that what is the cost benefit analysis? What are the benefits? Of course, you're doing a project which is climate sensitive, but if you want to register this project, so we are developing the projects, but now we want to register. There are associated costs as well as the revenue. So it's a balance. If the associated cost from selling CERs is lower than the cost that you put into the project, then that will be a management decision, and they will say, we will go ahead and register this project or not. Because whether you register it or not, you'll still get as a country or as a world, because carbon is not something which is localized. It goes to the atmosphere and it affects everyone. So whether we register or not, we'll achieve the target of reducing emissions, but will not get the additional benefits of selling or trading these emissions. I think I can close there, but I'll ask for more questions if there are questions or clarifications.
Great, thanks, Stanley. That's really informative. Thank you again for being flexible while you're in the field, and the connection was very good, thankfully. And I think, I mean, looking across the 3 project developers that we've spoken to today, you can see that there's the forestry, the kind of cook stove level, but also large-scale grid connected power plants owned by kind of public entities such as KenGen. So you can see the full range. I've got one on the time, so I'm just going to do a kind of very rushed recap, but I'd like to thank all of the panelists, Sally, Lillian, Christina, and Stanley as well, for taking the time to speak to us. And I think the point that Stanley made at the end was extremely valid, that I hope the message has come through to all of the participants today, those people aspiring to come in, that this is, not to make it too heavy, but it's not a very light decision to enter into a carbon project. You need to be very serious. You need to have a serious underlying business that is viable, not just a concept, but is a viable business. You need to then have access to funding, either from an investor or within inside the company itself, to make the decision to invest in going through that project cycle that we've looked at, engaging with the national authorities, designing the project, engaging with the national authorities, going through stakeholder consultations, contracting an auditing company, to then get to a stage of registration, which means you have the potential to generate carbon credits. So just to be clear, you've made the investment decision in time and money to have a future potential to generate carbon credits. You haven't generated anything yet, and you already have outgoings. Then you need to robustly monitor. Stanley, I think, is there in the field as a very good example of physically monitoring that business as well. And also what Sally and Christine and Lillian also presented, that needs to be tracked, it needs to be coordinated. And then it needs to be verified again. So another expense contracting someone like David to come and then give an opinion, and then you need to talk to that standard as well. And there's a range of standards out there. And as we understand, there's been successes up until the end of 2020. I think we've spoken to people on the last panel, just from my base calculations, kind of accumulatively account for 8-9 million plus carbon credits that have been issued within the Kenyan context. So it's real and measurable. But yeah, as we look towards tomorrow, we'll see that things are changing under the Paris Agreement. And that will be the focus of the context moving forwards with regards to Article 6 and developments under voluntary carbon markets. So yeah, I appreciate we've overshot our time by 30 minutes, but I'll just hand over very quickly to Bianca in case she has any closing remarks, and just thank everyone again for all of their input today, all of the speakers. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was a really great summary. I couldn't say it better. A lot of things to consider. I hope everyone has been able to pick from all the different presentations that we've gotten today. And from what we've seen from the presenters is it's taken a while. And just as Tim has said, you have to be very serious. But they've also been issuing for a while as well. So you have to definitely think it through. I won't go into a lot more details. I think the recap that Tim just gave was really great. So I hope that we can meet again tomorrow morning, where we can now look at how the landscape is changing, especially with the Paris Agreement. But I would really also like to thank all the presenters who are with us today. We will be sharing all the PowerPoints, and I hope you can get to know these names so that when we do start meeting physically or in different fora, at least you already know who's been working in the industry so far. Thank you once again, and we will see you tomorrow morning at 10. And hopefully we can do the exercise that was planned for as well. I know there's been a bit of changes, but the discussion has been quite engaging in the chat. So thank you for being so accommodating, and we will resume again tomorrow. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.